HOA newsletter headline read, "Unlicensed Backyard Inferno Threatens Neighborhood Safety." Below it, a grainy zoomed-in photo of me roasting marshmallows beside my fire pit with a caption that made me blink twice. Suspected arsonist. I read it again, sighed, then put on my uniform. It was time for the neighborhood to learn a hard truth. The man they just tried to find for fire safety violations was literally the county fire marshal. My name is Alex Booker, and I had recently moved into Magnolia Bluff, a so-called luxury gated community with strict rules, unnecessary fountains, and residents who mistook lawn stripes for personality. After 22 years in fire safety, I was looking forward to a quiet retirement neighborhood where I could enjoy simple pleasures. I was a quiet guy who liked grilling, hiking, and my Friday night bonfire ritual with my dog, Max. Nothing big, just a legal regulated fire done with more safety equipment than most commercial kitchens. But Darla Pennington, HOA vice president and pyrophobic busybody, hated it from day one. Darla was one of those people who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. She had been vice president for 8 years, ever since her husband left her for a yoga instructor, and she needed something to control. She drove a white Lexus with a vanity plate that read Rules 1 and had business cards that said Neighborhood Standard Specialist underneath her name. The woman color coordinated her dog's leash with her outfit and had strong opinions about the proper angle for decorative flags. She called my modest fire pit immoral barbaric and on her less creative days witchcraft adjacent. The woman had opinions about everything from mailbox heights to the acceptable shade of beige for front doors. But fire was her obsession. She treated my weekly bonfire like I was summoning demons in suburbia. Little did she know, I had been managing fire safety for the entire county for 12 years and had literally written half the fire code she claimed I was violating. What made this particularly amusing was watching her react to my setup. I had professional-grade fire extinguishers positioned every 10 feet around my fire pit. A sand bucket that met department specifications. A water hose with a fog nozzle attachment. Heat-resistant gloves hanging on a designated hook. My fire pit itself was a custom-built steel ring with proper ventilation holes and a spark artère screen. It was safer than most indoor fireplaces, but Darla saw flames and immediately assumed I was one marshmallow away from burning down the neighborhood. Darla began her campaign against me with handwritten citations taped to my fence, always signed in glitter pen with little hearts dotting the I's. They cited rules like unnatural light sources after sundown and open flame menace clause 4.9b. I kept them in a folder labeled evidence because something told me I would need them later. She would hover behind her perfectly manicured hedge with binoculars, muttering into a walkie-talkie that no one else in the neighborhood used. The citations became increasingly creative. She invented rules that didn't exist, like excessive smoke plume visibility and unauthorized recreational combustion. One citation accused me of creating a public nuisance through primitive cooking methods. Another claimed my fire pit violated the community aesthetic standards because the flames were too orange and didn't complement the neighborhood's beige color scheme. I particularly enjoyed the one that fined me for disturbing the peace through aggressive wood crackling. Her surveillance escalated from casual window peeking to full-scale intelligence gathering. She started photographing my fire pit from different angles, creating what she called a fire safety portfolio. She measured the distance between my fire pit and my house with a laser measuring device. She even tested the wind direction on Friday afternoons, claiming she needed to document how my toxic smoke was drifting toward her prize-winning roses. Then came the fake fire reports. 3 in 1 week. Fire trucks showed up to find me calmly flipping burgers with permits posted on my fence and a fire extinguisher every 6 feet my own department, my own crew. The awkward radio chatter was something to behold. "Hey Chief, it's that house again. The one with the actual fire safety expert. Roger that. Tell him I said hello." The first fake report came on a Tuesday evening. I was enjoying a quiet dinner by my fire pit when I heard the sirens. 3 trucks rolled up, full emergency response because someone had reported a structure fire with possible entrapment. Lieutenant Morrison stepped out of the truck, took one look at my setup, and started laughing. "Chief, we've got a controlled recreational fire with better safety equipment than our station house." The caller claimed there were massive flames visible from space and people screaming for help. The screaming was me, cheering for my football team. The massive flames were my perfectly contained fire that barely reached 3 feet high. Darla watched from her window as I chatted with the firefighters about department policy changes. She looked confused when they shook my hand and complimented my fire safety setup. When they left, she immediately called the HOA president to report that I had somehow bribed the fire department with hot dogs. The president, a reasonable man named Gary, politely suggested she might be overreacting, but Darla was just getting started. The second fake report came 3 days later. This time, she claimed there was an explosion in my backyard. The explosion was me dropping a log into the fire pit, which created a small shower of sparks that lasted exactly 2 seconds. The third report was the most creative. She told the 911 dispatcher that I was conducting illegal fire rituals and that she could smell gasoline. The gasoline smell was my charcoal lighter fluid, which I used sparingly and according to manufacturer instructions. The HOA escalated. They began sending me actual fines. $500 for unauthorized combustion, $1,200 for reckless ember activity. The last one was written entirely in Comic Sans font, which felt personally offensive. Each fine came with a passive-aggressive note from Darla explaining how my dangerous behavior was traumatizing her cat, Whiskers, who apparently suffered from flame-related anxiety. The fines were accompanied by increasingly ridiculous documentation. Darla had created a fire incident report with official looking forms and charts. She documented the smoke density of my fires using a scale she had invented. She measured flame height irregularities and spark dispersal patterns. One report included a hand-drawn diagram showing how my fire pit was allegedly positioned to maximize neighborhood thermal disruption. Another featured a timeline of my fire lighting rituals with notes about how I was suspiciously calm around flames. The breaking point came when she organized a neighborhood petition demanding my immediate fire cessation. She went door-to-door with a clipboard explaining to confused neighbors that I was a fire hazard and a public menace. Most people signed it just to get her off their doorstep. She collected 47 signatures and presented them to the HOA board as evidence of community-wide terror caused by my reckless fire obsession. Gary, the HOA president, called me personally to apologize. "Look, Alex, I know this is getting out of hand, but Darla is threatening to file a lawsuit against the entire board if we don't do something. She's claiming we're enabling neighborhood arson and that property values
plummeting because of your fire pit." Gary was a decent guy caught between a reasonable homeowner and a woman who had turned fire safety into her personal crusade. I had enough. Professional patience has its limits, even for someone trained in crisis management. I showed up to the next HOA meeting in full uniform. Badge, radio, and department identification clearly visible. I calmly placed a thick binder labeled Fire Code Compliance, Magnolia Bluff, on the conference table. The room went silent. Then I began my presentation. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige building with motivational posters about neighborhood harmony and community pride. About 30 residents attended, including Darla, who sat in the front row with her glitter pen and a new folder labeled Evidence Against the Fire Criminal. She had prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled How One Man's Fire Obsession is Destroying Our Community. She never got to use it. I stood up and introduced myself properly for the first time. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Booker and I am the County Fire Marshal. I have been managing fire safety for this region for 12 years and I helped write the fire codes that govern residential fire use." I paused to let that sink in. The room was so quiet you could hear Darla's pen drop. My backyard fire setup county certified and used as a training example for new inspectors. The HOA's fire-related bylaws completely overridden by municipal fire code which I helped write. Darla's emergency reports under investigation for filing false alarms, a misdemeanor offense. The best part, I was the investigator. I had been documenting everything, including her binocular surveillance and glitter pen citations. I opened my binder and began reading from the official fire code. Section 12.4 clearly states that residential fire pits are permitted when they meet specific safety requirements. I flipped to a page with photographs. These are images of my fire pit setup, which exceeds all safety requirements by a factor of 3. I turned to another section. Here are the permits I obtained before moving to this neighborhood. They were filed with the county clerk and are a matter of public record. The room was transfixed. Darla sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, still holding her glitter pen. I continued. The fines issued by this HOA are not legally enforceable because they violate established fire safety regulations. Any attempt to restrict my legal fire use constitutes harassment of a county official in the performance of his duties. I looked directly at Darla. Filing false emergency reports is a criminal offense punishable by fines up to $5,000 and possible jail time. Gary, the HOA president, cleared his throat nervously. So, Alex, what you're saying is that your fire pit is completely legal and that we have no authority to restrict it. That's correct, Gary. In fact, I held up another document. Your HOA's fire safety policies are outdated and potentially dangerous. I'm recommending a complete review of your emergency procedures and fire prevention guidelines. The HOA board sat frozen like mannequins in a department store window. Darla tried to interrupt with, but I read on Pinterest that outdoor fires cause cancer and was immediately shut down by the board's attorney, who suddenly remembered how state law works. The lawyer went pale when I handed him a copy of the county's new fire safety guidelines, now featuring a photograph of my backyard fire pit as the model example for residential fire safety. The attorney, a nervous man named Stevens, started flipping through the fire safety guidelines with increasing panic. He had obviously never bothered to research actual fire codes when drafting the HOA's policies. "Mrs. Pennington," he said quietly, "I think we need to discuss your position on the board. This could expose us to significant legal liability." Darla finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. You can't just show up here with a badge and expect us to believe you're some kind of fire expert. I've been documenting his violations for months. I have photographs, measurements, and witness statements." She gestured wildly toward her folder. "The community is living in fear because of his reckless behavior." I smiled politely and opened another section of my binder. "Mrs. Pennington," I said, "your surveillance activities are also documented. Here are photographs of you taking pictures of my property without permission. Here are recordings of your false emergency reports. And here is a statement from your neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who reported that you offered to pay her $20 to sign a complaint about my fire pit." The room erupted in whispers. Darla's face turned red. She started to stand up, then sat back down, then stood up again. "That's not she can't prove that. Actually, Mrs. Pennington, I can prove it. Mrs. Chen recorded your conversation on her phone. Filing false reports and attempting to suborn perjury are both serious offenses." Darla was asked to temporarily step down pending review. Her glitter pen trembled in her manicured fingers. She sputtered about property values and neighborhood aesthetics, but the damage was done. The board had just discovered they had been harassing a county official for following the exact safety protocols he had helped establish. The legal implications were sinking in fast. 2 weeks later, I hosted a fire safety awareness cookout in my backyard. Dozens of neighbors showed up. Burgers sizzled over my perfectly legal fire. Kids roasted s'mores under professional supervision. Local firefighters showed up with a truck for photo opportunities. The mayor made a surprise appearance and handed me a Community Resilience Award right there beside my fire pit. Darla watched from her upstairs window, fuming behind blackout curtains. Her backyard tiki torches were quietly confiscated 2 days later for lacking flame-retardant wicks and proper clearance from combustible materials. Turns out when you file false fire reports, your own property gets a very thorough inspection. The HOA board voted Darla out of her position by unanimous decision. She stood there clutching her glitter pen, speechless for the first time since I had moved to Magnolia Bluff. The woman who had spent months trying to find me for fire safety violations had just been removed from power by the very fire marshal she had been targeting. Her face turned the exact shade of red as my perfectly legal flames.